Was it the genie who said women often love men unworthy of them, or was it you?
No. It was the genie.
So, Arabian Nights are like Arabian days. I hear they're hotter than hot in a lot of good ways. But they're also something I become obsessed with every few years since the age of, I want to say 16. And one doesn't need to be Columbo or Poirot to get to the bottom of why, because it probably has something to do with Aladdin being number 4 on my list of favourite Disney films. I'm an ignorant white boy who needs Disney to learn about other nations. I wouldn't have even known about the rich history of Atlantis without them. And to be fair, Aladdin is one of the only modern works that portrays the Middle East in anything resembling a positive way, even if it is through a romanticised Western lens. And I remember the buzz around the live-action remake and Once Upon a Time finally doing Agrabah, because it would be a rare chance for Middle Eastern actors to get lead roles that weren't villains or terrorists. And it's very telling that Mina Massoud infamously talked about not getting a single audition for an entire year after having been the lead in a billion-dollar film, having deliberately avoided roles as terrorists or anything that might perpetuate negative stereotypes. Shohreh Aghdashloo likewise consistently refused to play those kinds of roles, only agreeing to play Dina Araz on 24 because she was more complex than those characters usually are in American media. Rami Malek conversely hated his character on the same show so much that he refused to play terrorists ever again. And while visibility is getting better compared to the 2000s, put it this way, when I was part of a Twitter game in, I want to say 2020, where we all shared what famous actors we'd been told we look like, actress Saba Amini stated this, and I'm not saying I have a solution, but I am suggesting something that could help, or pointing Hollywood in the direction of a goldmine that still has a bit left in it.
You're starting your story again. You have to hook your audience again.
The Arabian Nights, or the 1001 Nights if you want to sound pretentious, are a collection of folktales from the Middle East, North Africa, parts of India, and even China and Greece, all bound together by the framing device of one Scheherazade, daughter of the vizier to Sultan Shahryar. Now this poor guy got cheated on and had the offending wife executed, but I'm going to rescind that poor adjective, not just because he was royalty, but his solution was to marry a new woman every day and have her executed before she could betray him. And according to some translations, this went on for 3 years, which would be over 1,000 wives put to death. And so Scheherazade comes up with a plan.
I'll marry Sultan Shahryar myself.
And on the wedding night she has her sister brought to the room so she can say goodbye. The sister asks to hear a story, and Scheherazade spends the night telling one, and leaves it on a cliffhanger by the time morning comes. Shahryar is hooked, and postpones her execution for another day so we can hear the rest. And each night Scheherazade repeats this, with cliffhangers, stories within stories, or being like, and then these people showed up, do you know them? And keeps this going on for 1001 nights, even giving birth to 3 sons, so I would hope she got the evening off for the births at least. But by the time she runs out of stories, Shahryar is over his woman-hating and has fallen in love with her for real, so happily ever after. And so all the stories we know and love, like Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Sinbad the Sailor, and of course Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp, are ones Scheherazade tells to her husband, though those aren't part of the original collection, which was only about 300 stories, and they got added later on along with the other 700 by European translators, though they do originate with Syrian storyteller Hannah Diab, who actually based them on his own experiences. And yeah, you'll notice I said that European translators contributed to the collection because, actually, the Arabian Nights were never that popular in the Arab world. They were seen as lowbrow entertainment that only children would be interested in, versus more prestigious art forms like poetry, kinda like how The Sound of Music isn't that popular in Austria. But in Europe, they were actually rather timely. By the time the Arabian Nights started to catch on, Europe had already been through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, which was framed as coming out of the backwards and barbaric Dark Ages into a new enlightened period of artistic excellence. But guess what region was having something of a golden age around the time Europe was going through the Dark Ages? And so, the Middle East became viewed through a very romantic lens, as a wondrous place that prospered while Europe suffered. And then in the 19th century, when travel writing became popular, travelogues by Europeans also coincided with the Brits' attempts to destabilise the Ottoman Empire, and Napoleon trying and failing to invade Egypt and Syria, so there was a definite othering in this writing as well, not helped by artwork done by those who had never even been to the places they were depicting, and that gave rise to Orientalism as we know it. Another probable reason the Arabian Nights aren't too popular there. And with the rise of cinema in the early 20th century, the romanticised view of the Middle East as a land of adventure was shaped by 1924's swashbuckling epic The Thief of Baghdad, which received a lavish Technicolor remake in 1940.
I was about to bathe.
I'm waiting.
bathe with you there?
Neither of them adapted a specific story from the Arabian Nights, but they did contain an amalgamation of things, such as a toy horse that can fly, objects that allow you to see anything you want, magic carpets, royalty going out incognito, princesses falling for commoners, and of course, genies granting wishes. It's definitely the influence of these films that kept this more exoticized yet positive view of the Middle East in public consciousness, as the latter half of the 20th century saw the other depiction being more commonly used.
Pickpockets, murders, you name it, they do it. Don't trust any of them.
And actually at Disney, Jeffrey Katzenberg rejected the initial pitch for Aladdin because he didn't think anyone would want to see a movie set in the Middle East, only conceding when Linda Wolverton turned in a draft that was more obviously a throwback to The Thief of Baghdad. And Agrabah actually was meant to be Baghdad, but they had to rename it when the Gulf War broke out. And you would assume that these films, one of which is 101 years old, depicting the Middle East as a theme park for white actors in fake tan to have adventures in, were typical Orientalist fantasies, and you'd be correct-ish.
I want to be a bandit, can't you understand it?
The 1924 film has a character played by an up-and-coming Anna May Wong, who Douglas Fairbanks had seen in her debut film The Toll of the Sea, and personally offered her the role, and her presence in such a high-profile film pretty much made her career. Too bad Hollywood gave her next to nothing afterwards. The 1940 film also had Indian actor Sabu in a more prominent role named Abu, and yep, this guy was named after him, and it's this character who has multiple adventures, as well as a rounded personality, ultimately saving the day in the end.
But I must go to Baghdad to save my friend.
African-American critic Dave Ehrenstein later cited how much it meant to him seeing a hero who wasn't white, and it kicked off a trend of Arabian Nights-themed adventure films in Hollywood, with Sabu starring in at least one titled Arabian Nights, which can't really be called an adaptation, and again, not the lead, but still a dynamic hero.
I have a plan. We'll go to the smithy and...
The same film also made the career of Turhan Bey, who was later nicknamed the Turkish Delight for reasons I can't imagine. And more often than not, this was an excuse to get stars in revealing costumes, justified by the exotic setting far away from respectable society, but this did also mark a step away from white saviour narratives, since they took place entirely in the Arab world, with The Thief of Baghdad even having some accuracy in the costumes. And although these actors were American and European, again, it's Sabu saving the day, and Turhan Bey gets to have his role in an Ali Baba adaptation. And it's important to note that audiences during the golden age of Hollywood didn't have the craving for gritty realism that modern audiences do. The general public wanted to see big, lavish sets and fantastical escapism, because this, of course, was their only chance to see films in colour, with Arabian Nights 1942 also being Universal's first film shot using the 3-strip Technicolor process. Moving into the latter half of the 20th century, certain animated productions became fairly well received in the Middle East, such as the 1975 anime Arabian Nights Adventures of Sinbad, and of course... Arabian Nights! And the medium of animation meant they weren't seeing white actors treating their culture as a costume, since Aladdin's art style based the character designs on the shapes found in Arabic calligraphy, and layout supervisor Razul Azadani also consulted on the designs. The immersion could also be increased when these films were dubbed into Arabic and Farsi, with the aforementioned anime having an Arabic dub that's beloved to this day, and its opening is even used to help children with their language skills. So this push felt more like a good faith effort to celebrate Middle Eastern mythology and folktales, which brings us to the thing I really wanted to talk about.
People need stories more than bread itself.
In the late 90s and early 2000s, none other than the Hallmark channel brought a hidden treasure trove of greatness if you were a budding fantasy fan. Every year they would bring out a miniseries adapting or retelling a familiar story, getting a pretty good cast and having some impressive production values for the time. This was where we got the now beloved cult favourite The 10th Kingdom, which did the whole revisionist fairy tale thing long before it was mainstream. Their Snow Queen miniseries was a Christmas tradition of mine for years, and for anyone who loved that song, there's now an official version here. Just remember when a dream appears. My absolute favourite was the Jason and the Argonauts two-parter, and I may have heretically loved it more than the Ray Harryhausen film, and we did indeed get one based around the Arabian Nights, and it was fantastic.
I have to deal with the worst kind of madman. A madman with power.
Adaptations of The Thousand Tales tended to run into the same problems when translating them to a more visual medium. since first of all, the framing device is really hard to incorporate, as first you have to establish the situation that Scheherazade is in, which would need more than a standard 2-minute establishing scene to convey, and it could probably be hard to get people immersed in the story she's telling if they're aware that she's risking execution the second she runs out of steam, and do you incorporate just one story or multiple ones? And anthology films are just very tricky in general to pull off. The 1942 film kept the framing device, but just made it a story about Scheherazade, and it was mostly an original plot without any fantasy elements, with it being a running gag that Aladdin is a bit dim and thinks every lamp he sees contains a genie.
The genie at last!
This is no time for sleeping. I told you to get the litter.
Other adaptations just adapt one of the famous stories without the framing device, hence all the Sinbad films. The collection's episodic format could work on TV, but would need a big budget behind it, and again, might be hard to get invested in Scheherazade. And it was actually a thing back then that TV networks reported audiences not tuning in if there was too much conflict between couples, so there's that. And really, a miniseries is actually perfect, or at least this one's approach is, because this finds a way to emphasize the importance of Scheherazade's story without undermining the tales she tells.
If I can make him listen to my stories, maybe he'll change.
You don't sound as certain as you were.
I'm not.
Now the role is beefed up considerably, where she and the Sultan Sharia were childhood friends, and she carried a torch for him long before he married the wife who cheated, and we're constantly cutting back to her telling the stories, giving us an insight into her thought process, and really conveying that this woman is making things up as she goes along, but getting inspired along the way.
Is that the end of the story?
No.
We also get to see her during the day when she's interacting with her father, or visiting the local storyteller for inspiration, really bringing this frame story to life, and getting us invested in her character, and the storytelling sequences are just so well directed.
That's because I haven't told you about Black Coda.
In the hands of a lesser director, they just repeatedly cut back to the two in the same room and positions, but we're seeing them in different parts of the palace, such as the baths, and keeping things interesting from a visual point of view. The role is played by Israeli actress Mili Avital, so yay for appropriate casting, but also for the fact that she is really very good.
Love has nothing to do with worth. Love is a madness.
It feels weird saying this, but she is very well cast to play a master storyteller.
What's he got to do with Ali Baba?
He made Ali Baba rich and famous.
And honestly, I'd happily call her absolutely definitive in the role of Scheherazade. Granted, the plot gives the character a lot more to do, and it makes it her story just as much as the others, but if they ever do remake it like I'm suggesting, whoever plays the role will have a very tough job following her.
Tomorrow night.
I order you!
It wouldn't be the same story if I was ordered to tell it.
Dougray Scott is fine as Sharia.
It's a different story!
And this character gets a big but understandable overhaul to make him someone you'd actually want Scheherazade to end up with. Now his wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was cheating with his brother, and in the process of plotting to kill him, only getting accidentally killed in the crossfire. So now Sharia is traumatized both at the betrayal and the fact that he killed the woman he loved by accident, with Scheherazade emphasizing that she used to play with him when they were children. So this plan of marry a new girl and execute her the next day is wildly out of character, and there's no way he'd go through with it.
When I played with him as a child in the palace, it was always so happy. Everybody loved him.
And of course, she's the first new wife, so no 4-digit executions on this guy's record. Again, Dougray Scott is fine.
You made the story sound gripping with your wit and your charm and your beauty.
This was when on-screen portrayals of mental illness tended to just be lots of screaming and crying, so you're not going to get an especially deep portrayal, but he does a good job in some of the softer scenes. And yep, this is technically an I Can Fix Him story, but apparently that has wide appeal.
I just miss killing you. And you ask if there's something you can do for me?
Dougray Scott also doubles up to play Amin the Beggar for the 4th segment, adapting The Sultan and the Beggar, where Scheherazade uses the dynamic between the two to parallel the one between him and his evil brother, played by James Frain, who has always been the go-to guy for shadowy villains and really disappears into his roles, like this scene-stealing Spanish ambassador in Elizabeth.
Her bed is still warm. His Majesty finds it already cold.
Fans of Downton Abbey will also recognise Jim Carter playing the Vizier in both the frame story and The Sultan and the Beggar, with the former named Jafar, who is actually a real guy and actually introduced paper to Baghdad, so he can be credited with helping start the Golden Age. It was The Thief of Baghdad that started portraying him as a villain, and Disney took cues from that. Another villain actor in the cast is Rufus Sewell, who later got stuck playing that guy you don't want the girl to end up with in a love triangle. But if you've seen him in anything else, you know how great he is. And he also played the lead in Dark City, which to me is a 10 out of 10 film. Here he gets to go against type and play a younger and kindly Alibaba, and I just like it when Rufus Sewell gets to play a good guy. And look who's playing his brother. It's even fun foreshadowing for his later career that Andy Serkis gets a scene fending off CGI dragons. And a fun aside is that a variant of this tale shows up in a lot of African folklore, where there are only 6 thieves rather than 40. But speaking of both the 40 thieves and actors before they were famous, hey there, Oded Fair. I believe this was filmed before The Mummy, but released after, so everyone knew who he was by then.
How many of us do you want for the job?
And it's a shame he couldn't have had a larger role, but there's no way I'd be willing to swap out Checky Cairo, who is great at playing the villain of the segment, Black Coda.
Made a mistake. We have to correct it.
And yeah, a French superstar and César nominee is great in a small role, surprise surprise, but he chooses to play Black Coda as if this guy has a whole history we're not seeing, and really conveying the mystique. Hopefully I'm making sense, but Black Coda is a villain in an in-universe folktale, and his performance brings that across.
Spare me your normies.
The Alibaba segment also has another César nominee in Mira Kassar as the serving girl Morgiana, and I love this little bit where she's being hyped up as beautiful and clever, and we get...
She sounds like you.
Like me?
And Scheherazade is like, totally not myself insert. And you're probably guessing that the Alibaba segment is my favourite, and you'd be correct. Also for thinking that Morgiana is the coolest character.
Does he love me? You're a camel, what do you know about love?
Granted, in the original she sets the 40 Thieves on fire with oil, but this is still pretty neat. The miniseries also adapts the lesser-known tale, The Story of the Hunchback, which, yeah, comedy gold. Hey there, Alexei Sale.
I have always supported my family. They have never wanted for anything. Apart from Uncle Abdullah, he's wanted for bigamy and murder.
But what we're really here for is that the third story in Scheherazade's collection is indeed Aladdin, and this might be the only adaptation to actually set it in China like it was originally. Although to elaborate on the whole Aladdin was really Chinese deal, note that the China described in the original is more recognisably Middle Eastern, and while that would accurately describe, say, the Xinjiang region with its heavy Islamic influence, it's probably just meant to be a general faraway place, since the sorcerer in the story is from the Maghreb, aka Northwest Africa, sometimes Morocco specifically, and they were at the opposite ends of the known world at the time. So the sorcerer being from Northwest Africa and the story taking place in China indicated that he'd travelled the world looking for the lamp, providing shorthand for why it was so special. So Disney's interpretation of Aladdin as an Arab is still pretty valid, but this one's choice to go with a Chinese interpretation is a neat way to distinguish the two, especially since here Scheherazade sets her stories in different places, the first one in Syria, the second in Turkey, the fourth in Egypt, and the fifth in Yemen, with the main story taking place in Iraq. Anyway, look who they got to be our Aladdin.
And don't ask me to trust you, I don't even trust my own shadow.
So, Bruce Lee, Mowgli, and Aladdin, as well as David in Lilo and Stitch. This man has a CV.
Yes, you can have anything you ever wanted.
How about stopping the rain?
Jason Scott Lee is a great Aladdin. And look who it is playing his sidekick here.
Just shows honesty doesn't pay.
Peek Sen Lim is also a delight as his snarky mother. She too doubles up in the frame story, indicating that Scheherazade learned about China from her.
Not so much of the mother, I'm young enough to be your granddaughter.
And since Jasmine is my second favourite Disney princess, you bet that any other incarnation of Aladdin's princess has big shoes to fill, and here they have the inspired choice of Vanessa Mae, who's otherwise best known as a violinist, and according to Classic FM, the best-selling solo violinist.
Only the saddest words in any language. Only.
Here the princess is renamed Zubaida, because I guess Princess Badroul Badour doesn't roll off the tongue.
Haven't I seen you somewhere, Prince?
I've been somewhere, but I would have remembered you, Princess.
This version also includes the less powerful Genie of the Ring as well as the Lamp Guy, and they're both played by John Leguizamo, who appears to be having a lot of fun. And the climax is a magic battle where he's fighting with himself. And Hugh Corshi is also a delight as the sorcerer, and more entertaining than Disney's live-action Jafar at least.
My Hector's feathers! You never see a wedding day. Who's Hector? My pet raven and my best friend.
The fifth segment, The Three Princes, also has a very early role for James Callis, who the same year also starred in the aforementioned Hallmark miniseries for Jason and the Argonauts, as the villainous Prince Aspertes, which is more within type, but here you go.
Who do you favour, Father?
I have 3 blockheads for sons. How can I favour anyone?
We also have a one-scene wonder in Aisha Darker, who my introduction to was Coronation Street of all places, playing a character I loved who then turned out to be a real see you next Tuesday. In Arabian Nights, she plays both a girl in the harem and a femme fatale in the opening, and I honestly would have liked to see her play a bigger role in one of Scheherazad's stories.
If you don't, I'll wake him up, and he'll rip your head off.
This miniseries has a really good cast, is what I'm saying. These Hallmark miniseries could be a hit or miss in that department, but this one's pretty much all hit. They even won an award specifically for the casting.
It's a miracle.
Now, what we tended to be here for was the spectacle, because with the backing of a company like Hallmark, they often had some really good location filming blended with the constructed sets. Like, their Jason and the Argonauts miniseries had so many well-chosen locations in addition to the sets, as did the Snow Queen and the 10th Kingdom, and they struck the right balance between being escapist and still feeling real. Like, while I didn't mind the look of the Aladdin remake, in some ways it felt a bit constrained, more like an Agrabah theme park, even though the costumes were okay. This Arabian Nights was filmed on location in Turkey and Morocco, and this helps make it feel authentic. Besides being beautifully shot and staged, and the casting of so many actors with the proper heritage or close enough, it really makes this feel like a good faith attempt to celebrate the culture it's portraying. Like, note the portrayal of the harem, or harem as you've probably heard elsewhere. If your first thought is a den of forbidden fruit and all sorts of goings on, well, remember those European travel writers? Being men, they weren't allowed in the harem, and if you take a look at subgenres of exploitation films that revolve around women confined to spaces such as nunneries or prisons, you'll see that a lot of male writers think that as soon as women end up cloistered with no men around... In reality, a harem was just the living quarters for the women in the family, as well as female servants, where no men were allowed, as it's shown here. While Aisha Darker's character shows up in Sharia's imagination, him being the Sultan would allow him to enter freely. Fun fact, in a Persian household it would be called the Andaruni, or Zenana in India. Similar, you'll notice that the Ali Baba sequence has Morgiana performing a dance that Scheherazade is also shown doing, and this is where belly dancing as we know it comes from. Western ideas of belly dance derive from rakshaki, which may have started out as exercises for pregnant women, and I've tried it. It's an intense workout. But going back to those European travel writers who weren't allowed in the harem, due to gender segregation, they would likely have only seen the dances performed by slaves, and what we see in paintings is basically their exotic fantasy. And since Western nations were trying and failing to colonize the Ottoman Empire, they weren't exactly in a hurry to debunk this othering. So then we have operas like Salome set in the Middle East but created in the West, and dressing their dancing heroines like this, and then in turn Middle Eastern performers adopting that costume because Western tourists expected it. And now they call it the bedlar, which is just Arabic for suit. And Aladdin is deliberately anachronistic, with its belly dancers being conjured up by the genie, though I'm not sure about these gals. But anyway, these short scenes in Arabian Nights noticeably avoid the opportunity for some Orientalist titillation, which I appreciate, and it goes hand in hand with the miniseries' intent to be a respectful celebration of the 1001 Nights and Middle Eastern folklore in general. Now, that's not to say the costumes are 100% historically accurate, and the interpretation here seems to be more of a fairy tale representation of the time period, which is valid, and they are brilliantly designed by Maurizio Milanotti, who also did the costumes for these obscure films. And since one of my latest soapboxes is the declining quality of costumes in movies not directed by Robert Eggers, let's all take a moment to appreciate what we used to have. And while I didn't hate the costumes in the Aladdin remake, there's really no comparison here. But I've talked enough, so let's bring this magic carpet in for a steady landing.
Tomorrow night.
Now, this miniseries did pretty well when it was first broadcast, getting 5 Emmy nominations and taking one of them home for its makeup, but not costumes, alas, because behold its competition. Critical response was good too, with TV Guide describing it as gracefully directed and lavishly mounted. And it is now, shock horror, 25 years old, and we've conspicuously not had a major adaptation since. I wonder what could have happened after the year 2000 to influence that.
We really have to be more patient and more understanding and let the host country mourn over what happened, which devastated us all.
I mean, we did get the odd outlier like Prince of Persia starring Gemma Arterton, who could go both ways, and this is just an excuse for another great quote from Liana. But yeah, for the longest while, whenever it's a portrayal leaning towards positive, you get white actors and fake tan, but when it's a work that wants you to hate them, then it's time for authentic casting. But I like to think we've moved on a tad, since, after all, billion-dollar movie, and there's a writer called Cole Haddon who runs a fun blog called 5am Story Talk that I'd recommend, and he once pitched an Ocean's 11-style adventure movie starring the likes of Sinbad, Scheherazade, and Aladdin as played by Chow Yun-fat, with the studio-mandated token white character being a young Will Scarlet played by Zac Efron. And after reading that lengthy story, which sadly does not have a happy ending because Hollywood, my imagination is still going. Just imagine a fresh Arabian Nights adaptation with the talent that is currently going around. Mina Masood would be an excellent Sinbad. And that could be a fun casting gag if Dennis Akdenis was Ali Baba, since he played Aladdin in Once Upon a Time. Rami Malek as Sharia, maybe? If they're going to go with an Asian Aladdin, Jamie Chung has to be the princess. Of course, with an expansion of the role that does her talent justice.
I think that disqualifies you.
There's a canonical action girl called Miriam who'd be a good fit for Noof Al-Aribi, and how about roles for Oded Fehr, Nick E. Tarabay, Shorey Agdashlu, Alexander Siddig? And I know plenty of up-and-coming performers who'd do great if they were given the opportunity. And the role of Scheherazade could introduce us all to a great new talent who just needs the showcase. I even joked to one of my director friends recently that it would be fun to do an adaptation with all the actors we currently know, but alas, Ireland and funding for homegrown productions. But yeah, y'all don't want to see a low-budget adaptation where friggin' Brutus Bay is standing in for the Arabian desert. Hollywood, this bar was set high, rise to the challenge. Make it hotter than hot in all the good ways.